What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Bleav In Mavs with Mo Murphy. As always, I am your host, Mo Murphy. And today we're going to discuss game two. And we're going to preview game two for you. So, obviously, entering game two, the Dallas Mavericks are down 1-0. Boston Celtics with a big-time game one win. I didn't talk about it much. Actually, I didn't talk about it at all on this show. I was on Mad Dog Radio following game one, on FanDuel Radio as well. So, I had plenty of thoughts about game one. Sorry that I didn't put it on Bleav. But yeah, so, the Dallas Mavericks lost game one. Things happen. I know a lot of people upset one way, trying to talk about how Boston played in a positive light for the Dallas Mavericks. And the Celtics fans are going crazy, and it seems almost impossible that Dallas would absolutely have a chance because, in a 7-game series, game one tells you how the rest of the series is going to go, according to Celtics fans. But at the same time, like anybody for Dallas that's trying to be optimistic is kind of told like this series is over. Celtics in 5, Celtics in 4. Dallas doesn't have a chance. All because of a game one result. And I understand. Listen, here's my thing. Here's my main thought for game one that like I feel like both sides should look at it like, okay, Boston's favored in this series. I picked Dallas in 6. My pick's still plausible. 1. Like, Boston got to win 3 games for me to be wrong. Boston got to win 4 games for me to be completely wrong and go on and hoist up their 18th championship. But, like, when you really look at it, bro, it's 1 game. Like, and Boston came out on fire. Boston came out ready to play. Boston came out like the team that had plenty of players with plenty of playoff experience and multiple players that are key to their team with championship experience, whether they've played to compete for a championship in the NBA Finals or whether they've won a championship themselves. And like Drew Holiday, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown have been to how many Eastern Conference Finals? Just played in the NBA Finals a couple years ago and went to 6 against the Golden State Warriors. So like Kristaps has in this far. I understand that. I don't think Derek White has played in the NBA Finals, if I'm not mistaken. So I understand but they got a lot more vets. They got guys who've had a lot more playoff success. And so they came out in a team that's supposed to be taken serious as true title contenders, protected their home court in game one. Like, you still can walk out of here and win tonight, game 2, and the series be tied 2-2. I mean, the series be tied 1-1. Going to game 3 in Dallas. Like, that's not all the way impossible. On top of the fact that we know in the NBA, the series doesn't really start until the home team loses. So even if Boston comes in, and obviously if you're Dallas, you don't want to be down 2-0, but we've seen this happen so many times where teams hold down home court and go and lose 2 on the road. So like, it's not plausible. And I know it's going to be panic mode because this Boston team, especially to like Dallas, this is the best team we played all year. This Boston team is different. This has been the best team in the NBA for the entire season. Like, Boston is exactly where they're supposed to be right now. They're in the NBA Finals up 1-0. So from a Dallas Mavericks perspective, there's no reason to panic. And there's a lot of guys that I've linked with, content creators that I pay attention to, that cover the Mavericks that kind of have the same, they got the same feeling. Like, it's 1 game. You can point out all the things that Dallas did wrong. You can point out all the things that Boston did great. The last thing I'm going to say about game 1 is this. Boston came out in the first quarter on absolute fire. Everybody was hitting. Kristaps had his moment. Dallas played with Boston for the next 3 quarters, second, third, and fourth, and lost 70-69. So if you're Dallas, heading into game 2, the first thing that you have to prevent is Boston coming out on fire in game 1, like in the first quarter. Like, is Boston going to have 4 bad quarters? Probably not. I mean, this is a championship team. I don't think neither team is going to have 4 bad quarters. Dallas had to pay the price in game 1 for having 1. They played evenly with Boston for the next 3 quarters. But obviously, when you get down 17 early, when you're playing from a deficit for the next 3 quarters, then you have to play significantly better than the team that came out on fire in the first quarter for you to win the game. But playing and losing by 1, you got outscored 70-69. in the second, third, and fourth quarter. So for 3 quarters, for 36 minutes, you showed that you belong on the same court. You got within 8. There was an opportunity that, Dallas really had an opportunity to make this a game. So, like, Boston being able to do what they do in game 1 is no panic. So now we're talking about game 2. There's a lot of adjustments that people would point out that Dallas needs to make, which is true. There are some things that Boston does really well that I don't know if you could say like Dallas has to adjust to, as opposed to just minimize. Like sometimes it's not even about adjusting and figuring out, because you're not going to stop everything. These are 2 teams compete for a championship right now. These are 2 championship caliber teams. They're here for a reason. So everything that you saw in game 1 that killed you, you can't stop everything. Sometimes you just have to hope that Tatum and Jaylen Brown are shooting back, because they do the same thing when preparing for Dallas. You have a game plan, you trust in your game plan, but at the same time, like Boston was looking like, man, we probably also, on top of all that, we might need a bad shooting night from Kyrie Irving. We might need it where Dallas is leaning on Luka so much and other guys aren't hitting, and it benefits us and we win the game 1. So sometimes it's that simple with Dallas. We could talk about where they're at defensively, which I said if Kristaps was 80 to 85% healthy at least, then the mismatch that everybody talking about Kristaps brings in this series was going to be, it was going to be a factor. Kristaps is probably at least 80 to 85% healthy, and it was a factor in game 1. Kristaps is the key to make Boston a glaring mismatch from an offensive and defensive standpoint for Dallas. Now, I think Dallas will take advantage of them offensively in game 2, whatever. We'll talk about that in a second. But Kristaps is the key because he implements that 5-out offense. And somebody said this, I forget who said it. I love to give people their credit, especially when I see these things. And it makes my mind go a little bit when I see statements. But somebody basically said this Boston team is better, is a better version of OKC. OKC was the team that gave Dallas the most trouble. Dallas won in 6. Really, though, Dallas really could have won in 5. So them winning in 6 and how much trouble OKC gave them, I think was a little exaggerated, but OKC was a damn good team, and they could run that 5-out offense, and that made them a threat. I think, for somebody to say Boston is basically the better version of this team because you have Tatum and Brown and Kristaps, and you got vets that are ready to win, that have played games, as opposed to OKC. A lot of these guys, this was their first time, but in 3 or 4 years, they could look very similar to what this Boston team looks like now. I think that's an accurate statement. And so Kristaps being at least 80 to 85% healthy seemed like he could be close to 100. I thought maybe he comes out, he comes out nervous. He hasn't played this far. Maybe he comes out and he's a little hobbled and he gets exposed on the offensive and defensive end. That's what you have to hope as a Mavericks fan anyway. Like when one of their players, one of their starters is coming back, you're like, okay, well, the rust will be a factor. Hasn't played since early in the first round. And it wasn't a factor. Kristaps had his moment. Now, I feel better defensively of like, maybe you have to make Kristaps beat you. Maybe Kristaps can't beat you. Maybe he can't have an explosive game 1, but the closer you get, the farther you get into a series, the more that these moments matter. And that's where the superstars rise to the top and some of the role players disappear a little bit. The more important these games get, the more it's on the star's shoulders. So the farther we get into this series, I think the more it's leaned on Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum and Luka and Kyrie as opposed to anybody else. Difference is Derek White could play really well. Kristaps could play really well. Al Horford is a seasoned vet. He's been here before. He could play really well. So, like, you have all these factors, and the veteran leadership of Boston kind of favors them in the deeper you get into a series as well. But when I'm looking from a defensive standpoint, Kristaps unlocked the glaring mismatch by being able to hit shots. Can Kristaps do that again? I think that's a fair question. For any player that hasn't done this on multiple occasions in the NBA finals or in the conference finals or deep playoff runs, it's okay to question, okay, Kristaps had a really great game. Boston fans can think this is going to be for the next 5 or 6 games of the series, and that's fine. Be a fan, love your team, and love what you saw. But if I'm Dallas, I don't think Kristaps does that again. So I might come out and the focus will be, you know what, Kristaps will have to come out that hot. And if he does, you adjust right away. You don't let it get through the first quarter and then figure out how can we play with them for the next 3 quarters. You give it the first 3 or 4 minutes. And if he's off, it changes the dynamic of what you can do defensively. And so you don't have to necessarily have Derek Lively with his head in his chest while playing help side defense to prevent Kristaps. So I do think there doesn't have to be so much of a focus on the now. You do got to stop the 5-out offense though. And if they are hitting like that, it's gonna take a toll on Dallas defensively. Jason Tatum said something, which there's going to be some shots thrown from both sides. They're both competing for a championship. They feel how they feel. These are the two best teams in the NBA right now, going back and forth. And Tatum, basically pointed out that he loves what Boston could do because they don't have to hide anybody defensively. We could pick out some moments where Tatum got beat or Jaylen Brown got beat by Luka. Like, we can pick those apart, but I don't really want to argue with Celtics fans trying to figure out, well, Tatum said this, but got beat 4 or 5 times by Luka in one-on-one at the top of the key. But it's true as far as I don't think Dallas is hiding anybody defensively, but I said having to play a 5-out guard, a 5-out offense, there is no help. It does expose you as a one-on-one defender. It does make you have to slap the ground, put your butt down, and play defense and not get beat because you're not going to have that same rim protection from Derek Lively or Gafford. And you saw that on multiple occasions with Kristaps being able to be in the corner, Al Horford being able to shoot and be a threat from the three-point line. You saw all of that come into fruition of like, dang, this 5-out offense is tough to stop, especially when they're hitting. Boston went cold at a point in time, and that's when Dallas heated up and started making it a game. So, like, Boston's not going to shoot like this for 4 quarters, I don't think, in any game. So now you look, the biggest adjustment is we played with them for the final 36 minutes and lost by 1. So what we have to prevent is an explosion from the three-point line early. The better we start playing offensively and the more points we can put on the board, we're more prepared to go back and forth in one of those explosions. But when we're not hitting threes and Boston's hitting everything they're chucking up, sometimes it's just not your game. And so that's what happened in game 1. Offensively, when I'm looking at Dallas, you want Luka to have more than 1 assist. I think coming into this game, Boston took everything away from Dallas. And I know it becomes a cause for concern because you think that's what it's going to be for the next 4 or 5 or 6 games. I don't think that's the case, but they executed their plan, their game plan for game 1 really well. Is PJ Washington going to shoot that bad? I don't know. Since the OKC series, we really haven't seen the PJ Washington that I think was a big part of getting us to the NBA Finals, including like he had some moments in the Minnesota game. You started seeing the decline of play and the consistency of play from the OKC series to the Minnesota series, but I don't think PJ is going to be a non-factor for the rest of the series. So, like, okay, he had a bad game. Kyrie Irving had a bad game. Guys are allowed to have bad games. If this series goes 7, I promise you, Tatum had a bad game offensively. He does all the other things. He makes an impact on the court, and they got a great team and they won. So you're not going to point out necessarily how bad Jason Tatum played because it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter how bad Jason Tatum played when you win. It's easy to think like that. If Dallas had won and Kyrie shot as bad as he did, you think he really would have cared? Like, it's not going to eat him up. Yeah, I need to play better, but even when I don't play well enough, but we get the win, that's good enough for me. We live to fight another day. I can fix my personal play. But in a win, it doesn't have to be so much emphasis and focus on or pressure on the fact I got to play better. So I think that's where Jason Tatum's at. And so I'm looking at Dallas, and I just think offense, man, it's so simple and it's so cliche. But sometimes the simplest fixes or adjustments are tough because it's that simple. Like, Dallas can't get outshot against Boston from the three-point line the way they did, especially early on. Very simple. That sounds simple. All you got to do is hit threes. But hitting threes is not simple if you're not getting the wide open looks that you once were getting, the wide open looks that you're accustomed to. Now you're going to have to hit some tough shots. Now that corner three that you do find yourself wide open on a breakdown on Boston defensively, now there's pressure on these shots. This is the NBA Finals, and so there's more pressure on every shot, especially when Boston plays so well defensively. If you are able to break their defense down and find yourself open in the corner, as a shooter, you know you have to make that shot because you don't know how many open looks and opportunities and easy shots are going to come throughout the rest of the game. Well, a lot of other times throughout the playoffs, you saw like Dallas was open a lot. Derrick Jones Jr. was open a lot, and they were making teams pay for leaving them open. Now they're going to have to make teams pay by just being able to take a good shot and make a tough shot. And so can PJ Washington do that? Can Derrick Jones Jr. do that consistently? Like, those are the questions that you have offensively, because Boston is going to make you shoot shots that you don't want. Bread and butter was getting Derrick Jones Jr., PJ Washington, and these guys open in the corner for wide open threes. Boston's number one thing defensively, they are number one in taking away the corner three. So their biggest strength on defense is your biggest strength offensively. So who can draw up plays to better take advantage of their biggest strength? Game one, it was Boston. Boston had a better plan defensively to keep their strength, and make Dallas's strength their weakness. It happens. It's okay to admit that, while also knowing coming into game two, I say this is the feeling to me is a must win. I think because if I'm Dallas, one, I don't want to have to go to 7 if I'm trying to win a championship. I've said this the whole time. If I'm Dallas, I'm trying to get up 3-2 heading into Dallas game 6, and that's where I handle business to keep the Larry O'Brien in Dallas. Obviously, if Dallas walked off the next 4, nobody would be upset. Nobody would be mad that they didn't see this coming. That's fine. But just because of how good this Boston team is, I do think that Dallas has to win this game. You want to split in Boston, send a message, and now flip the card and put the pressure on Boston heading into Dallas. Because if you lose, all the pressure in game 3 is on you, because we know the history of being down 3-0. We know even if you're down 3-1 after 4 games coming out of Dallas, going back, like now every game is favored for Boston in their environment. Every game is the position the easiest for them to win. So you got to make this tough on Boston. Apply some pressure on Boston. You start by winning game 2. You start by coming back to Dallas, it being 1-1, and now apply pressure that maybe Boston, it's a must win for game 3, because they don't want to be down 2-1 and have all the pressure in the world in game 4 to leave out of Dallas down 3-1. So that's why I feel like it's a must win. But at the same time, if Boston wins and they're up 2-0 heading into Dallas, but Dallas wins game 3 and wins game 4, leave out of Dallas is tied 4-4, like it's tied 2-2 after 4, then you feel just as well. And essentially the series still hasn't started. Like this series is even killed and the road team hasn't the road team hasn't won yet. So that's also a very plausible thing that we could see going on in this series. So all the panic that I saw, all the negativity from outside Mavericks fans telling us, oh, this series is over. Y'all can't, there's no way y'all going to beat Boston. This Boston team is built different, but like sometimes Boston can be their own kryptonite. And I think like in game 2, Coach Kidd said, the other day, and it's a mind game because of this stat. If I know this stat and I'm aware of this stat, I know Jason Kidd is aware of this stat because he's an NBA coach playing for the NBA Finals. There's no way I come across a stat like this that means so much, and Jason Kidd doesn't know, and that's why I think he said what he said. Boston in this playoffs is 5-0 when Jason Tatum shoots 40% or worse from the field. So when Tatum is effective everywhere else but having a bad shooting night, they don't lose. And so I think Jason Kidd saying Jaylen Brown's the best player, and during the media session was to challenge Jason Tatum to try and basically have this legacy game. I think that's where Jason Tatum's at. If he has 40 and puts Dallas away in game 2, I think this could be his stamp on maybe being a top 5 player, especially if they go on to win the championship. But Kidd knows that when Tatum's at his best, the Celtics aren't, essentially. And when Tatum is really playing really well from an offensive standpoint, especially scoring the ball, Boston does stand around a lot. Boston does kind of let Tatum cook, and then they wait, and then Jaylen Brown needs to take advantage of every time he has an opportunity to score. And so it seems like they stand around. So when Jason Kidd's like, you kind of want to test Jason Tatum and see if he'll come out and not play Boston basketball and try and be an individual player and put his stamp on this NBA Finals. And I think if Jason Kidd could get, if what he said, the mind games that he's playing could get Jason Tatum to play that way, then that it falls into Dallas' strength and they'll have a lot better opportunity to win this game in game 2. But before we, I'm going to take Dallas winning game 2. I think we'll head out of Boston being tied 1-1. But for the reasons of Luka will have more than 1 assist, I think guys will hit shots. Kyrie's not going to shoot 6 for 19. I think he's going to figure out a way. At the end of the day, this is one of the most gifted guys with a basketball in his hand this sport has ever seen. So there's just some things. I don't see Kyrie. He had the worst game of his finals career, any game that he's played for in the finals, in one of the worst games of his playoff career. Do I think that's going to be a trend for Kyrie Irving? Hell no. I think Kyrie Irving is going to turn it around. And like we saw that 9-point game in OKC, and then he came and had 20-something points and had 30 in the game. Like 20-something points in the first half, 30 in the game. Like, Kyrie's capable of that. Do I think he'll have back-to-back games? No. The only thing I don't like that Kyrie probably said is I thought they would be louder. Like, I don't know if I'd rile up the city or the crowd that hate you, but other than that, and that's what people focus on, Kyrie said all the right things. Other than that, like, honestly, he had to throw his little jabs in there at the end of the day, but other than that, Kyrie said all the right things. There's no need to panic. I got to understand that I got to play better. I know that. I'll be a better leader. It's only one game. This is a process. We weren't going to win 4 in a row. We didn't promise you that we're going to sweep Boston and this will be the easiest championship in the world. It takes time, and it's a chess match. They won the first round. Now we got to respond. Like, it's not that difficult of a concept, but a lot of people are making it a difficult concept. So I'm going to take Dallas to win game 2. I could be wrong, obviously, but I'm going to take Dallas to win game 2. I think this is a close one. If you're a betting person, I would take Dallas with the points. I definitely don't see Boston shooting their way into a double-digit win again. I would take Dallas +7. I would take Luka over points. I would take, if you could catch Kyrie Irving at 22, over 22.5, 23.5, I would take his over on points as well. The guy I would pay attention to that's going to be a little enticing is Jason Tatum. I think last time I looked at his line, his points are 26.5. What I think Jason Tatum should do, I would take his over, but you know what I think Boston needs to do to be the best team to be able to try and win and go up 2-0, I would take his under. But either way, I'm not the most betting individual, so don't take all my betting advice. This is just where I'm coming from for the bettors from an analysis standpoint of watching the game and what I expected game 2. But I appreciate everybody for tuning in. I appreciate everybody for listening. Be well, be safe, and up in flames. Bleav in Mavs. We'll be